What's up, folks? This is Tony Brewer. You're listening to or watching, as the case may be, Cogitations. Cogitations is the podcast where we think about things, we contemplate them, we turn them over in our minds, and then we discuss them. Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, Daniel writes, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, my countenance changed in me. But I kept the matter in my heart. We're not going to keep the matter in our heart. We're going to talk about it. Today, we're going to talk about sin. I was having a conversation with somebody, and you know what? I figured it'd make a good podcast episode about sin. How did I title this? Sinful acts or situational sins? First off, there's no such thing as well, that's a lie. There is such thing as situational ethics, but the ethics are not valid. The ethics are not very ethical. I can't I can't say that something is evil in one situation, but you take it and change the situation, then that's not evil. I think about, and lying is one of those things. Listen, it doesn't matter. Lying is always sinful. Lying is always evil. It doesn't matter if you think the ends justify the means. The act of lying itself causes you to be in sin. Like that the act is sinful. So we're going to talk about that today. Are there actions that in certain circumstances are deemed sinful or not? And what are those, like, what does that even mean? You know? Anyway, let's see if we can make something coherent out of this. Um, Before I fragmented my thought there, I think about this illustration that I heard years ago. I don't know how much truth is to it. It's probably one of those apocryphal illustrations that have to do with the president, with one of the presidents of our nation, the United States. You know, there's one with George Washington. He chopped down a cherry tree. His daddy asked him if he did it. He said, "I did, Dad. I cannot tell a lie." That's an apocryphal story. The story just tells you what it the story, an apocryphal story tells you what the perception of an individual is, or the perception of the people. Like, how do people think about George Washington? Well, they think about him as being very honest. That's what that tells you. The apocryphal books of the Bible, the ones that are not canon, but they have some very interesting stories in there. And Bel and the Dragon, um, about Daniel. And again, it doesn't tell us a whole lot other than how people perceive Daniel. So I believe what I'm about to tell you is an apocryphal story. Abraham Lincoln, talking to a group of law students, posed this question. If a cow, if you consider the tail of a cow to be a leg, how many legs does a cow have? And people raise their hands. Well, a cow would have 5 legs then. And Abraham Lincoln replied, no, it doesn't matter what you consider a cow's tail. A cow only has 4 legs. Also, now that brings to mind, there's a man I love in the church, Joe Christopher. His wife was telling me about her little granddaughter. This has been a decade or more ago. And she was pointing to the little calves and the cows and such in the field. And she said, "Look at them puppies." I believe I'm telling this story right. The bones are there. The gist is correct. So she may not have said exactly, "Look at those puppies," but that's in effect. And the way Sister Christopher put it was she kept trying to tell the little girl, little toddler girl, "No, honey, those are calves. Cows have calves. Those are cows and calves, not dogs and puppies." And she said, "No, Grandma, look at them puppies." And she just would not be convinced. And Sister Christopher kind of applied that to the way people, our society was beginning. It doesn't matter what you call something. It is what it is, or it isn't what it isn't. Now, can I explain Hebrews 10:26? That would be I can, That would be a very good free for all Friday. So tomorrow, if you will comment, if I've got enough time, I'll talk about it today. But if you'll comment tomorrow and ask me to explain Hebrews 10:26, I surely will. So the idea then is it doesn't matter what we call something. It already has an identity. There's no situation in which you can lie. There's no situation in which you can steal. There's no situation in which you can murder and be right with God. Now, all of those things have very clear-cut definitions. Like for instance, somebody might say, "Well, Tony, how can you say you can't murder?" I mean, because people that go to war, they're murderers. No, they're not. Soldiers operating on a battlefield under the authority of a sovereign nation, they are not murderers. You may not like their cause, but they're not murderers. A person who takes a life in self-defense is not a murderer. A murderer is a person who takes the life of an innocent when it wasn't deserved and they had no authority to do it. That is murder. Now, you're very welcome, by the way, Teresa Thomas. And like I said, I may have enough time at the end of the show to get to it, but it's a somewhat complicated. It's not like a Hebrews 10:26 means, and I can sum it up in 3 words. So I've got a little bit of an outline here to walk down, and then I've got some actual practical examples, I suppose, of actions, some of which are sinful, some of which can be sinful. So let's just look at it. When examining the nature of actions and whether they are inherently sinful. Now, let me give us a definition of this term inherently. I use this term all the time, and in preparing this, I realized actually that's not true. I have realized years ago that I've been using this word inherently in association with one particular thing wrongly. I should not have used it. All right, look up inherently. In a permanent, essential, or characteristic way. Okay, Tony, me right here, my name's Tony. I am inherently a large individual. If I lost 100 pounds, which is about how much weight I'm carrying that I don't need, according to the doctor, I will still be, by any metric that's used to measure human beings in size, I will still be a large man if I lose 100 pounds. I just people don't people grossly underestimate all the time exactly how dense I am as far as my body is concerned. Sometimes they underestimate how dense I am in my brain, but that's a different story. It's another podcast. But largeness is one of my inherent qualities. You will never look at me and say he's small. You might look at me and say he's small compared to that giant, but you'll never look at me in a crowd of 1,000 human beings. You'll never look and say, "Hey, go get Tony. He's the little guy over there in the corner." You may say it ironically, but you won't be serious. So, when examining the nature and actions, the nature of actions rather, is an action inherently sinful? Lying is inherently sinful. You cannot divorce the action from the state or the effect. Lying, when we lie, we commit sin. It is essential to understand that the moral structure God has given in Scripture deals with these nuances. Certain actions are clearly sinful in and of themselves. That's what inherently means. In fact, let me give you another IPSOFACTO definition. ipso facto, by that very fact or act. All right. It's a Latin phrase, ipso facto. And here's a example sentence. The enemy of one's enemy may be ipso facto a friend. So by the very fact of you being the enemy of my enemy makes you a friend. Lying is sinful ipso facto. By the very um, fact or act of lying, one has committed sin. Okay? Now let's get back to my outline. Certain actions are clearly sinful in and of themselves, ipso facto, lying, while others depend on circumstances and motivations. Let me give you one for circumstances. The sexual act. The sexual act is not inherently sinful. The sexual act is not ipso facto sinful. You haven't committed a sin ipso facto by the sexual act. If you commit the sexual act outside of the parameters God has set up, you have, but you have to bring in extra stuff. You have to have that sexual act outside of marriage. You have to have that sexual act with someone who's not your wife. You see? So this distinction helps illuminate why certain behaviors are condemned universally, while others are situationally judged. And I think this is where we need to really understand and be on the same page here. There are many actions that we perceive, I should say, as ipso facto sinful that are not. And that's hopefully towards the end, we're going to bring that out. All right. Inherently sinful actions. Let's talk about lying and stealing. Those are the two easiest. Proverbs 6:16 through 19. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look, lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren. Well, Colossians 3:9 commands, lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds. Lying undermines the truth. Lying, we don't understand this. I've thought about this a lot because I've conceptualized and thought about lying a lot when it comes to sin, and did a deep dive of, oh, come on. There's subjective graded morality, of graded absolutism. There we go. Look up graded absolutism. It's very interesting. Lying is always a lie, or lying is always evil. Murder is always evil. Lying is not as bad as murder, so you can lie to save someone from murder. That's the logical progression. Graded absolutism. Lying and murdering are absolutely evil, but murder is worse than lying. You see where I'm going with that? Anyway. But here's why lying is so egregious. You set yourself up in the position of God. You literally speak a reality into existence. I'll give you an example. The very, very early memories of my childhood is going to the bottom of the hill, not a steep hill. This is not walking uphill both ways in snow. It's just a little bitty, like a gently rolling hill, but I mean, it was a hill. And I had to get my little red wagon, and I was able to fit about 10 to 15, and as I aged, 25 or 30 pieces of firewood in that little red wagon. And I would pull it up, I'd pull it up that hill, and I would put wood on the porch. And then that's how we would heat our house. One evening I come in to my parents and I said, there's a snake out there in the wood pile. And they got up, got their clothes on. They'd already settled in for the evening. They weren't going outside again. Well, they unstacked all of that wood looking for that snake. And I realized right then what I had done. I spoke that snake into existence. That snake affected their lives, regardless of whether or not it was real, regardless of whether or not it was existential. It might as well have been. It couldn't have affected them any more if it were real than the way it did. And then it dawned on me, this ain't good. And it was years later I was able to figure out why it wasn't good. God is the only one who has a right to speak things into existence. He's the only one that has the power. If you don't have the power to speak something into existence, you don't have the right to claim it. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. You cannot be God and lying inadvertently dethrones God and sets you in his place. That's why lying is so evil. So lying undermines the truth, which is central to God's character. John 14:6. Listen to it. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So if you lie, you are separating yourself from God by that act, ipso facto. Now let's talk about stealing. Exodus 20:15, thou shalt not steal. That comes over into the first century, into the new covenant in the 21st century. Stealing violates another person's rights and the principle of ownership. Jesus himself opined the proverb, when a strong man armed keepeth his palace, his goods are at peace. Maybe that's not an opine. That's Jesus just spake that proverb to teach everybody listening a lesson in us years later. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands, the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. Ephesians 4:28. Stealing, the very act, ipso facto, inherently reflects a disregard for the blessings that God has given, and it shows a blatant disregard for the blessings that you've been given. So let's talk about actions that are sinful, but only in their context. So I've started the podcast earlier. Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Do you understand that the married couple in their bed is doing the same thing that the whoremongers and adulterers are doing in theirs? They just have a right to do it. So the act is not ipso facto sinful. The act is not inherently sinful. The act actually is inherently holy. And you have to do something unholy and bring it into an unholy setting in order to pervert it. It's not ipso facto sinful. It's sinful in the wrong context. Outside of the boundaries of marriage, sexual relations become sinful. 1 Corinthians 6:18-20. Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Now let's talk about deception, subterfuge. I'm going to say, how do you pronounce that? S-U-B, subterfuge. I'm going to see if it's, nope, subterfuge. You pronounce the B. Well, how do you like that? Subterfuge. What? Subterfuge? That don't sound right. I'm just going to say subterfuge. I got mired down. Let's go past this. Who cares how it's pronounced? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Deceit in order to achieve one's goal. That's what subterfuge is. And you might think, well, Tony, no, situational ethics is, you're teaching situational ethics. You can't deceive and still be right with God. Just chew on this for a minute. Now, here's the thing. You can't lie. God cannot lie. Lying is inherently sinful. Deceit is not. Listen to it. And I have been accused of promoting the fact that God can lie. I do not do that. Listen to this. Abraham used subterfuge regarding Sarah, his half-sister and wife, in Genesis 12:10 through 20. And Pharaoh called Abram, and said, What is this thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. Abraham did this again in Genesis 20. Now listen, I think it's important to notice that Genesis 12 was before Genesis 15. Genesis 20 is after Genesis 15. What happened in Genesis 15 that would make the Genesis 20 situation more egregious than the Genesis 12? In Genesis 15, God takes Abram out and asks him to count the stars, the sands. So I'm going to bless you with a child. You're going to be the father of many. You know what stands in the way of having a child? Your death. You know what stands in the way of you being a father? Your death. You might give Abraham a pass, or Abram a pass, in Genesis 12. Because maybe he didn't have enough information to know that the only way God could keep his promises is to keep him alive. Abraham did this again in Genesis 20, 1 through 18. I'm not going to read that whole text, but I'll read you one segment of it. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? Like, what have you seen from us to make you do this thing? Well, Abraham said, Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. Folks, that's subterfuge. It's also self-preservation, but he committed sin. It wasn't the act of subterfuge that caused him to be in sin. He didn't tell a quote-unquote half-truth. There's no such thing as a half-truth. A half-truth is a whole lie. Hogwash. A half-truth is the truth. There's no such thing as a half-truth. It's a logical absurdity. It was 100% true that woman's his sister. It's 100% true that woman's his wife. Now, if you ask me, who is this woman to you? And I say, she's my sister. I might have a valid reason for saying that. I haven't lied to you. And it's not my fault you don't ask for more information to clarify. You might say, well, I saw you kiss her on the lips the other day. Well, it's my half-sister. Now, in the 21st century, this is crazy and taboo, and nobody purposely in their right mind marries their half-siblings or siblings. But the idea is, from the perspective of the day, then this is pretty normal to marry your half-sibling. Do you remember the account of the storm on the Sea of Galilee? And the disciples came to Jesus, who was sleeping in the boat, and said, What are you doing? We're up here dying. And Jesus said, Oh, ye of little faith. If you had faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, you'd be able to tell this mountain to relocate. Anyway, what do you think Jesus meant when he said, Oh, ye of little faith? He had been telling them since the inception of his ministry, I've got a date with destiny. You know what is a great impediment to what would have been a great impediment with Jesus' date with destiny? If he'd have died beforehand, if he'd have died on the Sea of Galilee, if the disciples had have had the faith and understood what it meant for Jesus to be the Son of God, they wouldn't have been scared. If Abraham would have understood, if he'd had faith in God, he wouldn't have felt the need to deceive these people about Sarah being his wife. That was Abraham's sin. Abraham's sin was a lack of faith. He acted without faith. He fell prey to the common blunder of thinking that he was standing alone. Self-idolatry was his sin. Self-importance and arrogance was his sin. Not relying on God when he needed to was his sin. His lack of faith was his sin. Subterfuge was the symptom, not the cause of his sin. Now, if you don't believe me that subterfuge is not inherently sinful, well, God couldn't participate in subterfuge nor even order subterfuge if it was inherently sinful. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 16. God instructed Samuel to tell the men of Saul that he was going to sacrifice, when in fact he was also going to anoint the king to replace Saul. And Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord, and call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee." Now, picture this. You're walking down. You're traveling down to wherever Jesse is. Saul's men stop you and say, "State your business." "Well, I'm Samuel. I'm heading down to the house of Jesse." "Why are you going to the house of Jesse?" "See this heifer? I'm going to sacrifice a heifer at the house of Jesse." Now, if that's all they say and they don't ask any follow-up questions, Samuel is not responsible for telling them everything that's in his brain. Samuel also hasn't lied by making those men of Saul believe that the only reason he's going down there is to sacrifice a heifer. They are not entitled to everything that's in Samuel's brain. Now, if they would have stopped and said, "Samuel, state your business. I'm going down to Jesse's house." "Why?" "Sacrifice a heifer." "Is that the only reason you're going down there, Samuel?" If Samuel says anything other than no, or "I don't believe I want to answer these questions, would you please just let me go," then he is in sin. But it's not the subterfuge, it's not the deceit. It's at that point he's left the room of subterfuge and deceit and entered into the room of lying. You see, subterfuge and deceit is not ipso facto sinful. It's not inherently sinful. It's situational. It depends on your motives and outcomes. Think about an undercover police officer. Think about a soldier behind enemy lines. Think about David playing like he was sick, feigning illness. He was just crazy acting a fool. They believed he was sick. It's not their fault. It's not his fault they didn't clarify. If I'm remembering, there could be something in that story I'm forgetting. Anyway, now let's talk about actions that are neutral. Subterfuge is neutral, but your intentions. I need a better way to put this. Maybe some of you that listen to this will help me. So my heading is actions that are neutral by nature, and I have funeral arrangements. So making funeral arrangements is not sinful, nor is it righteous, as in it's not holy. No more than going to do number 2 in the bathroom is holy. Does that make sense? I need a better way. It's just neutral. I may need a better way to flesh that out and to articulate what's in my brain. This is why I do these live, by the way. because I run into stuff like that. I do stream of consciousness. I do a little bit of organization. And as I talk through it live, I run into something like this. We're like, that's not put well. Let me give you the information. And after the fact, maybe I can come up with something better. So I want you to, we're going to, hello, Dinah Harden. We're going to Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. The express reason why Joseph is in Faith's Hall of Fame is because he made funeral arrangements. Now, I say that a little tongue in cheek. While Joseph was alive, he said, look, God's going to deliver you. When you leave Egypt, take my bones with you. And he told them what to do with them. Well, Genesis chapter 50, 24 and 25. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware unto Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. His actions, folks, demonstrated his faith that God would bring Israel into the promised land, making them significant. I think making his actions significant. Here's what I think now that I've read that. There are actions that are ipso facto sinful, inherently sinful. There are actions that are legislated and regulated by God that are sinful if practiced outside the parameters, such as sexual relations, okay, the sexual act. There are actions that are morally neutral, such as using the restroom, such as making funeral arrangements, such as, we'll say, saving money. Now, the actions that are truly neutral, like, I don't know, how can you commit sin by making funeral arrangements? I guess if you made your funeral arrangements, but you made them contrary to trust and faith in God, then you would be committing sin, and the symptom of that lack of faith would be how you made the funeral arrangements. But making funeral arrangements in and of themselves is not sinful. So when I think about sin, when I conceptualize sin, well, just like faith and being pleasing to God is the action you take based on what you believe when it is within the confines of God's parameters, the paradigm that he set up, then that's faith. That's righteousness. Little children, let no one deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. 1 John 3:7. But if you have an action, if you lack faith in God and think you've got to do all this on your own, that nobody has faced any kind of problems like you've ever faced, so you've got to solve this on your own, and God's not going to help you, and you take actions based on that, on your lack of faith, then those actions are symptoms of your sin. Like making funeral arrangements, but you make these, let's say you spend $10 million on a mausoleum that preserves your body because you think that science is going to come along and be able to resurrect you one day, and you don't trust in God and believe in God. Well, that big mausoleum and all that, that's not sinful. That's just a symptom of your sinful attitude in life. And I pray to God I'm explaining this correctly. This is not something I've worked out in my head over years. You're witnessing me working it out. And sometimes I actually change my mind during a live stream. I have not on this one. So, evaluating actions in the light of God's parameters. Well, some actions are inherently sinful, such as lying or stealing, because they violate God's nature and commandments. Other actions, such as sexual relations, subterfuge, I'm going to have to figure out how to pronounce that, they depend on context and motivation to determine whether, and I don't like that sentence I wrote. I wrote that sentence. I don't like it. Subterfuge isn't sinful. Abraham didn't commit the sin of subterfuge any more than Samuel would have committed the sin of subterfuge. Abraham's sin was a lack of faith in God. Abraham's sin was a shirking of the duties of his of the role of his role as a husband. The symptom was subterfuge. Samuel, if he'd have been stopped by Saul's guards and said, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm going to Jesse's house to sacrifice a heifer. All right, go in peace." That's not sinful, but it also shows faith in God. I'm going to have to work on that sentence. I'm going to have to figure out how to say that. So, neutral actions, funeral arrangements, going to the bathroom, whatever, they can gain moral value if those are symptoms of your faith in God. Like, for instance, the reason why Joseph is in Faith Hall of Fame, he wasn't the only person in history to ever make funeral arrangements. But what made that action special is because it was a symptom of his faith. Actions born out of faith in God that don't violate otherwise God's law are symptoms of your faith, and they extol your righteousness. They showcase your righteousness. Actions that are born or done out of a lack of faith in God, those are the symptoms of your sin. But the actions themselves are not, they don't make you right and they don't make you wrong. I think that's what I think give me another few months and I'll be able to articulate this very succinctly and clearly. I hope I'm articulating it well enough now. Study to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15. Understanding the distinctions that we've discussed today, it will help us discern the morality of our actions and how they align with God's will. By evaluating actions through the lens of Scripture and understanding the context in which they occur, we can rightly divide or handle aright the word of truth and live lives that reflect God's moral order. I hope I've said something that has edified you and informed you. And I hope that the fact that I was working this out in my own head, not that I was working out in my head, I was working it out in how to articulate what was in my head. Sometimes that's one of the most difficult things when it comes to being a Bible teacher, is figuring out how to say something where folks understand it. You understand it just fine, but you got to figure out how to say it where folks will understand it. And a lot of times I fail miserably at that. Good morning, everybody. Teresa Thomas, I think I want to answer your question on today's show. Hopefully you're still here. If you're still here, if you would, let me know. And if I don't see a comment from you, I'll still cover this. It's a brief answer in the whole scheme of things. I can cover it tomorrow during the show as well. But let me get the comments here. Terry Crooks, good morning to you. Teresa Thomas, thank you for your question. Dana Harden, good morning to you. We didn't have a whole lot of comments and stuff today, but I am glad for all of you that are watching on YouTube. Please, if you're watching live and you're hitting that thumbs up button, that's great. That's awesome. But if you want to do me a big favor, back out of the live stream chat and go to the YouTube video just like it's there and hit the thumbs up button. And that will leave a permanent like on the video, and that shows YouTube that the content's interactive. So let's go to Hebrews 10:26. Awesome, Mary Pryor. Thank you so much for listening. Hebrews chapter 10, 26. First, the first thing we know about Hebrews 10, 26 is it immediately precedes Hebrews 10, 27 and immediately follows Hebrews 10, 25. And that's about all the time I can, all the time I can stall. I'm right here now. All right. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sin. So in order to explain that verse, let's walk through it backwards. There remaineth no more sacrifice for sin. When God said, let there be light, there remained a sacrifice for sin. God could look over the expanse of time and he could see the cross. And from God's perspective, that was real and existential as if it was already 2,000 years ago from our perspective. So when Adam sinned, God did not have to destroy Adam and Eve. He could show mercy and allow them to live. And he implemented this system of sacrifice. Under the patriarchal age, which is the age in which Adam and Eve lived and the whole earth before the law of Moses was implemented, evidently, you had sin sacrifices. You would sacrifice an animal on an altar. So once the law of Moses was implemented, there remained no more sacrifice for sin under the patriarchal covenant. Now the sacrifice that remained for sin was in the Mosaic covenant, and that was in the form of your animals, the animal sacrifices that you brought. And then on the Day of Atonement, you had 2 goats. One was a scapegoat, and the other had his blood shed and sprinkled on the mercy seat. Now, once Jesus died on the cross, was raised again, and sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, the day of Pentecost came, the New Testament was promulgated, there remained no more sacrifice for sin under the Old Testament. There was a new sacrifice for sin, that was Jesus Christ. The 2 sacrifices for sin that the Old Testament produced was the sacrifice of the blood of bulls and goats, but the culmination was the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. We don't normally think about everybody in the world that enjoys freedom from sin because of a sacrifice for sin under the old covenant. Think about that. That's very interesting. So that's the 2 sacrifices that the law of Moses was to produce. Producing at the time the blood of bulls and goats, but then the culmination was the blood of Jesus. Now, once the gospel system remains, in the gospel system, there is no more sacrifice for sin coming. The sacrifice for sin came. It's a paradox. It's a living sacrifice. The blood of Jesus flows. Now, if you go back under the old covenant, or if you try to go all the way back even to the Mosaic covenant, or you just eschew all of God's covenants whatsoever, and you're going to go under the Hindu religion, there's no more sacrifice for sin coming. That's it. You leave Christianity, there's no more sacrifice for sin. What else can you do? Now, in the context, if you're a Hebrew practicing Christianity in the 1st century, and you decide in Jerusalem that because the abomination of desolation did not destroy the city the way it was prophesied to destroy the city, and you say, well, I don't think Jesus was the Son of God then, so you leave the law, you leave the gospel of Christ and you go back under the law of Moses, you can practice the law of Moses forever. There remains no more sacrifice for sin. because the law of Moses already gave us or produced the sacrifice for sin. Now let's go back. So there remaineth no more sacrifice for sin. It's done. So if you sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, so if in the context of the writing of this scripture, you're a Hebrew in Jerusalem, the willful sin is going from Christ to Moses. That is Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together. Not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together is an idiom, an idiomatic statement. It's a figure of speech that means don't go back under the law of Moses as some people have. Because if you sin willfully, that's the sin that's in question. If you go back to the law of Moses as some people have, there's no more sacrifice. The only thing waiting for you under the law of Moses, here it is. Verse 27. A certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation. The law of Moses already produced the sacrifice for sin, Jesus. The only thing that's waiting in the law of Moses, if you forsake the assembling of yourselves together, is a certain fearful looking for of judgment. What is it? The destruction of Jerusalem. The only thing waiting for you in AD 55 or AD 65 or AD 68, the only thing waiting for you in the law of Moses is the wrathful judgment of God. There's no sacrifice of sin left. It's already been produced. That's Hebrews 10:25, 26, 27. Hopefully, Teresa Thomas is still there, and hopefully I've answered that question well. I answered it correctly, but I don't know if I answered it well. Folks, that is all I have got for today. I'm so thankful that you've tuned in. I hope that something profitable and pleasing to God was said. Remember, don't forget, Christianity Now on Substack. Also, The Mindful Soul. I should have had that queued up. I'm just going to share the link to Lebeth's Mindful Soul. You will be blessed going and subscribing to The Mindful Soul. Also, you will be blessed, if I do say so myself, if you go to the Mindful Soul ChristianityNow.substack.com and subscribe to Christianity Now. We got some good articles. Thank Dinah Harden. It's my pleasure. She says thank you for your time. I would love, I'm telling you, I would love every one of y'all. We got 375 subscribers on the Christianity Now Substack, and we are averaging north of 9,000 downloads or 9,000 views per 30 days. 9,000 views per 30 days. That is crazy. I wonder, I'm just going to calculate it. I'm going to see what that average is. All right, so you got 9,000 divided by 30. Y'all, we're getting about 300 views per day. Now, we're averaging about 170 views per article. So that means that consistently we go back and consistently we have people go back into the archives and read articles that we've uploaded. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that amazes me that we've actually gotten something that people are finding value in, and it will always be free. We will always have the lion's share of our content before the paywall. Now, we do have stuff behind a paywall, but we do have 17 paid subscribers on Christianity Now Substack, and we have, I think, about that many, or no, we've got like 8 or 9 supporters on Patreon. If you're a supporter on Patreon and you don't have access to the behind the paywall stuff on Substack, send an email to christianityisnow@gmail.com and let me know, and I'll make sure you have access to that. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. Oh, thank you so much. Bernice Britton said, enjoyed your explanation of Hebrews 10:26. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm always self-conscious. Do you know how much of a genius I am right here? And for those of you that are not watching, I'm pointing to my head. But there's something that gets lost in translation sometimes here. So from about the space of from here to here, my head to my mouth, it gets all jumbled. And I know what I'm trying to say, but you don't know what I'm trying to say. So I got to be careful. Anyway, show topics and questions, send an email, christianityisnow@gmail.com. And if you're one of our patrons and you don't have access to the Christianity Now premium content, shoot me an email and I'll make sure that happens. And incidentally, it is awesome for you to do a subscription on Substack. The subscription on Patreon, it is easier. Like it's just to set it and forget it. And you can do it for as little as $1 a month. Anyway, that's all I've got, folks. As far as that goes, let me do something I hadn't done in a while. I'm just going to go through this since we've got some time. Nearchurches@gmail is a PayPal that we've used for years. Aaron Dotson, Brock Kendall, and myself used to have a show called We Talk Truth on the Near Churches platform. And we just kept this. And some of you like to send us donations through PayPal. Thank you very much. I've started doing a little bit. I'm trying to get stuff going on Twitter or X. We are streaming on X today. So if you'll go to Christianity Now at 1 Chronicles 1232. I would love to get a presence on X. I'm kind of surprised. It's not bad. So 1 Chronicles 1232, and you can help us grow on that platform. Other than that, subscribe to Christianity Now on Substack and consider doing the $5 a month model. That would really help us out. But share the content, share the content, share the content. Consume the content, share the content. Those are the two biggest things you can do to help us grow. So, folks, thank you so much for your positive feedback. beamindfulsoul.substack.com, christianitynow.substack.com, and subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, all of that good stuff. On YouTube, we're closing the gap between the 1K and 11K. No. 1K and 1.1K, 1100. Folks, we put like 50 subscribers on the board in the last 48 hours. That's cool. Anyway, God bless every one of you. You know what to do. Podbean, Apple Podcast, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. Incidentally, who's messing with me using a VPN? I'm getting folks listening to me on my podcast from South Korea, China, South Korea and China. Somebody's listening on a VPN. They got to be. Anyway, that's all I've got. God bless every one of you. Podbean, Apple Podcast, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. This has been Tony Brewer with Cogitations, and we'll